the Polgar Chess University. In this lesson, our topic is attack. Attack in the Sicilian defense. And no other than Garry Kasparov will show us how to play against his own favorite Najdorf Sicilian. The game we will be examining is Garry Kasparov white against Boris Gelfand as black. The game was played in the legendary Linares tournament in 1993. Well, let's get started. In this game, e4, c5, knight f3, d6, d4, pawn takes, knight f6, knight c3, and a6. This is the starting position of the famous Najdorf variation named after the great Polish-born Argentinian grandmaster. Here white has many approaches, bishop g5 being considered one of the main ones. In recent years, other moves such as bishop e3 became popular thanks to a number of the British grandmasters. And of course, the favorite of Bobby Fischer once upon a time, bishop c4, which has also been favored by my sisters Judith and Sophia, and also in this game chosen by Garry Kasparov as an approach. Black now plays e6, developing, and white here plays bishop to b3, which is the typical move here, to avoid ideas as such as playing b5, b4 with gaining tempo, attacking first the bishop and then the knight, and then possibly the pawn on e4 could get in trouble. You may wonder why black couldn't have done that right away. The answer is simple, because if black would do the b5 and b4 right away, then for example the knight could go now to various places, but even if it goes to e2, the pawn is taboo because of the fork of the bishop. So the point is, it was not a problem a move earlier. However, now that black has played e6, the d5 square is covered, and therefore this idea gains significant strength. And to prevent it, white plays bishop b3, b5, and even though black kind of is threatening to play b4, reality is that white happily sacrifices that pawn because black would waste too much time in trying to win that pawn and at the same time open up the e file. And theory considers it not advisable for black to go after the pawn at this stage. I don't want to get too much into the actual opening stage of the game, but want to focus on the middle game part of it. Black continued with bishop e7, developing, and white continues as they normally do in this position with queen f3. As we know, there are two types of attacks. One is that involves a lot of pawns, a pawn storm, advancing the pawns, and with that trying to open files against the enemy king. And then there are the other type of attacks, which involves only or primarily piece attacks, the queen, the minor pieces, and sometimes even a rook or two. So for now, white is preparing to put the queen on g3, assuming that black sooner than later will castle to the king's side. Given the fact that black already has played a6 and b5 and has no c-pawn, it's highly unlikely that black would want to castle to the other side of the board, as it would not be very safe would they do so. So black now continued with queen c7. If black would continue with the more natural looking bishop b7 right away, that would give white the opportunity to immediately destroy the defensive chain of pawns in front of the black king by sacrificing the bishop and immediately getting 3 pawns. Now the queen is under attack, and then here comes the third pawn on g7. So white would get 3 pawns, which normally pretty much compensates for a sacrificed piece, and in addition would strip black from the right of castling. Not that castling in this position would be such a tremendous help, because so many of the black pawns are no longer either existing or at their initial positions, so therefore white's compensation is more than sufficient in this case. And that is why it would be an error to play bishop b7 at this stage. So black plays queen c7, and of course white cannot win a piece thanks to the discovery along the diagonal, because black would have an intermediate move playing bishop b7, attacking white's queen first, making sure the rook is safe in the corner, and only then capture the pawn on e5. Let's go back again. And now came queen to g3, attacking the pawn on g7, and black castled, protecting the pawn. And now the attack continues with bishop h6, using the pin and of course threatening to checkmate right away, which black defended against. And now white simply brought the rook to the game, rook a to d1. As we can see, white is playing with all the pieces, while in the meantime black's queen side is still sleeping. Black played bishop to d7, which has several ideas. One is that if black would play knight c6, then after a potential trade on c6, black could recapture with the bishop. But the other and perhaps more important idea is to give a bit protection to the b5 pawn, and in many cases black may try to play a5 and a4, trapping white's bishop, as we shall see. In this position various moves have been tried, such as a3 or f4, but in this game Garry Kasparov at the time made a novelty, namely bringing the knight back to f3. One of the key ideas when you're attacking you can think of is, how can you get as many of your pieces to aid the attack as possible? And as you shall see, white will do an excellent job in mobilizing all his army against the enemy king. Now black could have played knight c6, perhaps a better choice, but in this game played b4 instead, chasing white's knight away. And the knight is happily moving towards the other side of the board with knight e2. And black played a5. So now we see what's going on. White is going all out on the king's side, while black is trying to create counterplay, or in the meantime trapping the white bishop on the other side of the board. White played knight f4, playing very much straightforward, ignoring the idea of black trying to trap the white bishop. If that's what white would do, then white would not continue with knight h5, because then black would escape after just playing g6, giving up on the rook on f8, and now after white would capture on f8, black would simply capture back, probably with either piece, and then the white bishop would still be trapped on b3. So therefore this is not the best way to continue. One more time, after knight f4 and black plays a4, the correct choice is to immediately sacrifice the bishop on g7. Now of course the bishop threatens to just move away somewhere backwards on the diagonal, and that would result in checkmate in just a couple moves. Or if the knight does capture the bishop, then white would play knight h5 and then threaten a deadly checkmate with queen g7. Black would be in serious trouble here. Let's go back. After knight f4, Black realized this threat and therefore moved the king out of the pin. Well, this also means that now the white bishop on h6 is under attack, so it needs to move. Now the same sacrifice loses effect, as after knight captures back, there is no pin on the horizon. Now white continued by simply retreating the bishop to g5. It's important to point out that if now Black would trade bishops, white would capture back with the knight. And the biggest problem that Black has is that all of a sudden, unexpectedly, the e6 square becomes a target. So therefore, playing a4 would only play under white's hand, as white would now just sacrifice on e6, and then the knights would get to e6 with a fork. So let's go back again and look at the situation after bishop g5, when Black responded denying the exchange of bishops and played back to f6 with the knight. So now again the question is what to do against Black's a4 threat. Well, if white would have to go on defense, Black would be in good shape. Also, remember the pawn on e4 is under attack right now. But Kasparov found an efficient way to continue the attack and played queen h4. This obviously deals with the threat of knight takes pawn on e4, as now the queen would no longer be attacked after such a move, and therefore the bishop on e7 would be lost. However, it did not deal directly with the other threat of Black playing a4 here. And this move did not happen in the game, but it's certainly worth examining what may have Kasparov planned. And I suggest, before you go any further, you try to take a bit time, maybe even half an hour, and try to analyze the complications of this position. Of course, without needing to mention, hopefully without any help of the computer. Because of course, the computer may be very good and fast in finding the truth in such situations, but if you let the computer think instead of you, that will not help your own chess. So, hopefully you did spend all that time and came up with conclusions, and now you can compare those to mine. So white now should play knight h5, follow up on the attack. Pawn captures the bishop, and knight captures f6, threatening to checkmate on h7, and bishop captures on f6. Playing h6 right now wouldn't be a wise idea, because the bishop would capture. Of course, pawn cannot capture bishop because of immediate checkmate, but bishop can take on f6, attacking white's queen, and now white can bring yet another piece to the attack. Knight g5. Now white is clearly threatening to checkmate in 2 with bishop g7, followed by queen h7, and therefore bishop needs to take on g5. And now white doesn't just capture back on g5, because in that case Black would maintain the extra piece, but play bishop g7. Very nice move. Double check. King has to capture. Queen captures g5, king h7, and rook d3. Very nice, threatening to checkmate on h3, but Black can still defend against that by playing e5. And now white simply doubles up on the g file with unstoppable checkmate threat. Very nice variation. Let's go back again to where the game stopped after queen h4. We're examining what would happen if black continues with a4. As we said, white continues the attack with knight h5, and black can capture on b3, knight captures f6, and here we saw the variation of what would have happened if now black plays h6. But let's follow up with bishop f6. Black is up a piece for now. Bishop captures f6. So at the moment there is material equality and black has numerous choices. The best one is, most challenging one is, to actually capture the bishop on f6. But before we go further, you may wonder what would happen if black instead would capture on c2, attacking our rook on d1. Well, now white would be ready to checkmate in just 2 moves by playing knight g5, threatening to checkmate of course on h7, and after h6, queen captures h6. Actually the checkmate is coming in 3 moves, not in 2. The king moves away and we're ready to checkmate, for example, on h7. Another very nice variation. Let's go back. After white plays knight h5 and takes, and knight takes, and bishop takes, and bishop takes, now let's see what happens after pawn captures the bishop. Queen of course captures, and king g8. And now the best attacking move for white is to play simply knight g5. This has several purposes, but the main one is to simply open up the third rank for white's rook to effectively come and attack black's king. Now let's see black's best defense, bishop b5. And now the other idea, of course, white played knight g5 not only to open up the third rank, but also to create the threat of queen h6. And black's last move was also effective in that it opened up the 7th rank. So now black could consider defending the h7 square by playing f6. However, the problem with this is that now white has all kind of forks in the picture. Look at that. Now fork on the queen, and then after the knight captures the queen, black's rook and bishop is forked as well. Again, white will be ahead. Let's go back a few moves and see black's better approach. Instead of playing f6, simply moving the rook away, trying to create an escape route for black's king. Black can try rook e8, but then again white will be better after queen takes h7 check, king f8, and now simply capturing the pawn on d6, which of course is well protected indirectly, as if queen takes rook, then white checkmates right away. And for example, let's see a sample variation. If bishop captures on f1, white could play e5, a very tricky move, but black has difficulties to defend against it. For example, if now black captures on a2, white would be ready to check, king e7, and now queen f6, king f8, check, king g8, and queen h6, with the idea of then checkmating with knight f6. Okay, let's go back all the way to the game, where in this position after queen h4, Gelfand chose not to play a4, although perhaps it gave more challenge than the actual game move. Although the best option probably here is to do neither what he played nor a4, but to play knight c6 and develop finally that last piece as well. White would continue with knight h5 also in that case. But let's see the actual game, which was really interesting. Bishop b5, which attacks the rook on f1. And now comes the surprising part, when not only white did not move the rook away from the attack, but played knight d4, a very fancy move. If black now indeed captures on f1, the plan was to do a big sacrifice on e6, pawn takes back, and now the quiet bishop e6, much better than knight e6, because it threatens to checkmate immediately with knight g6. Black is in major trouble. If they would play h6, bishop would capture, of course, right away, and g6 doesn't solve any problems either, as after the checkmate follows. Very nice line. And black did not go for this, understood that bishop f1 would lose, and retreated the bishop to e8 in hopes to guard the g6 square. But the sacrifice continues anyway. Knight takes, pawn takes, knight takes, queen moved away, and now a very fine move which opens the d file, and we'll find out very soon why that's so important. Pawn takes, knight takes, bishop takes, bishop takes, pawn takes, and now the rook is ready to come down to d8, create a skewer. Black played knight d7, protecting everything for now, but the problem comes on the opened g file with queen g4, checkmate threat immediately on g8, and black can only delay the end but not change the outcome after queen e6. A brilliant attacking game by one of the greatest players ever, Garry Kasparov. And now let's see the jewel of the week, which was composed by Richter. In this endgame, white is a pawn up, but there are a lot of problems. The knight on e6 is under attack, and so is the pawn on h5. And seemingly, everything's under control on black's part. I suggest take some time and try to figure out the ingenious combination that leads to a forced win. And the answer is white playing f7. Wow, but this gives a pawn up. Well, let's see what happens if queen captures. Well, that's the simpler situation. Then the queen moves to a8, king h7, and the fork arrives. Well, that was simple. Now let's see the more complicated one. What happens after f7 if the king captures? Well, white can play queen g6, king e7, and now capturing the knight is not sufficient because black would play queen d7 check and then capture white's knight as well. And here comes the surprise. White trades queens. Normally such an endgame where there is knight and one pawn against knight and one pawn almost always ends in a draw. However, here white has a brilliant tactical idea. Knight takes g7. Very nice. Check. And when knight takes h6, and the knight cannot catch the pawn, and neither can the king because the knight is in the way. A wonderful, wonderful endgame. I hope you enjoyed this lesson as much as I did, and be back next week for some more chess ideas. Thank you. Bye-bye.